Welcome to the Ultimate Beginner Quilt Series by Fat Quarter Shop. In this series, I'm going to be showing you how to make a quilt all the way from the start to the finish. This series is sponsored by Moda Fabrics and Eversewn Sewing Machines. I'm going to be giving you lots of tips, and we're going to be building our first quilt together. The Friendship Star variation is the final block in our Ultimate Beginner Quilt series. Thank you so much for joining me in all of this. It's been so fun watching you all grow as quilters. In this block, we're going to be learning how to work with strip sets, and we're going to make some more half square triangles. So let's get started. So you can download this free pattern in the description box. From our pink and lime, we're going to be cutting two 5-inch squares each, and those will be your fabric A and fabric B's. From your coral and light blue, we're going to be cutting two 2.5 by 13-inch rectangles for both, and those are going to be your C and D's. So from our pink and lime, we've got to cut two 5-inch squares from each, and we have enough to stack them. And so we're going to need 5 and 5. So we need 10 inches. So I'm going to look, and I'm just going to cut a big 5-inch strip. So I can tell that I've got 5 inches here. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to turn the fabric without getting it out of place. Cut a 5-inch line. So right on the 5-inch, and you can look to make sure you've got all the way down on the pink, that you've gotten both layers. We're going to turn this and have a straightening edge, a straightening cut, and again we're going to just rotate our fabric where it doesn't move out of place. And we're going to cut 5-inch. So we've got the top and the left, we've measured, and we've got 5-inch. And then we're going to cut our second 5-inch. So our pinks are going to be our fabric A square. So we are going to put the alphabet E on top and put that on our design board. Our lime will be our B squares. So we've got A and B cut. And if you don't have big enough pieces, you can cut those one by one also. Now on our light blue and our red, we need two 2.5 by 13-inch pieces. So if I look on my ruler, this is 13 inches. And I need 4 inches. So I'm just going to cut a little section out that will be big enough. I'm going to cut here and cut across. If you turn that around, we can subcut this into 13 inches because we've cut the top and the side. So we're going to measure this. This is going to give our side of 13 inches. We're going to turn this around, and we need to cut 2.5 and 2.5. So 2.5 plus 2.5 is 5. So I'm first going to cut at the 5 so you can tell that I've got everything lined up. And you can see that I cut all the way to the bottom. You can just check to make sure it went through both layers. Move your ruler to the 2.5. And you can see that I'm cutting a little bit more because we've built our skills so that you can cut 2 layers at a time now. So on the coral, these are going to be our fabric C's. So put those on the design board. And the light blue is going to be your D's. And now we can assemble our block. So now we're going to start with our fabric C and fabric D rectangles. This technique we're going to be learning is making strip sets, and it's a time saver for when you're working with 9-patch or 4-patch blocks, and you're going to love it. So we're going to put our C and D right sides together, and when you're working with solids, there's not a right or wrong side. I am going to pin on each end. And this doesn't have to be lined up exactly on the ends because we're going to be subcutting, but just for beginner purposes, I'm going to line them up just so I kind of get used to it. So got this one pinned. We're going to do the same thing on our second strip set, and we're going to pin at each end and then throughout. And I love to pin because if you don't pin, when you get to the sewing machine, it might get all wavy and out of order. And then when you get to your sewing machine, you can go a little bit faster. So pinning takes a little bit of time, but it's faster on your sewing machine. And we're gonna just go and we're gonna stitch with a 1/4 inch seam down these 2 seams. So we're gonna sew down this seam allowance. And we're just going to make sure as we're stitching that everything stays lined up on the edge and doesn't come apart, because if you stitch like this, you will not have an accurate block. So you just want to keep this edge right here nice and straight. You can always stop and just check to make sure that everything's lined up. We're gonna keep stitching. Those apart, and we are going to go press. So now we have our 2 strips together. To save time, I'm going to set the seams together at one time just to save time, and then we're going to press toward the light blue. And so again, I like to finger press, put the iron right on the seam. Make sure it's nice and flat. And these will be called strip sets, and we're going to be subcutting them in a second. And you're going to see how making one strip set and cutting it apart is going to really save you time so that you don't have to start and stop so many times. So from your strip set, you're going to first make a straightening cut. I'm going to put my Creative Grids ruler right on the seam. Just one of the lines and cut. We're going to rotate and we're going to subcut this into 5 2.5 inch strip sets. So you can either do it 2 ways. You can put your ruler on the 5 inch and cut, move it to the 2.5, and the reason I'm doing that is 2.5 plus 2.5 or 5. I feel like if you make the biggest cut first, it's easier. Or if it's easier for you, you can just cut 2.5, one at a time. So there's 3. And here I'm lining up the 2.5 and this. If it ever gets the alignment gets off, you can do a straightening cut. So on this one, it looks like I'm not perfectly aligned. So I can do a straightening cut on the edge. And when you're doing straight strip sets, you can do a straightening cut at any time, and that's what gives you really nice accuracy. So now I have 5 2 patches. And so we saved time, because if we would have cut squares to start with, you would have had to sew, chain piece, sew, 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 sew. So this saves a lot of time. So I've got 5 here. We're going to do the same thing over here. straightening cut, looking at the line. And this time I can just do 2.5 each time. So 2.5. Two and a half. So again, this line, this line. Now from here, I'm just going to go ahead and do another straightening cut just to keep us straight. I can tell that it might be getting a little bit off. 2.5. So now you have 10 two patches. I'm going to divide that into 2 stacks of 5. So I have 5 here and 5 here. I'm going to rotate, and we're going to turn the 2 patches into 4 patches. And what I'm going to do is nest these seams where they meet up, and you can really feel it lock. Put a pin in that intersection and a pin in each end, and I'm going to do that for all 5. And then when we're done, we're going to have 5 different 4 patches. And a 4 patch is a really great beginner. So if you want to move on after this project to do something really beginner, a 9 patch or a 4 patch project would be great to start with. So we're just pinning in the center and each end, nesting our seams. We're going to put all of this on our design board, and we're going to go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch seam. Just pull your pin out as you get to it. We're going to just chain piece all of these together. And you can see when I get to, I'm kind of keeping my finger when I pull this pin out. I'm going to just keep my finger right on that intersection to keep it in place. I'm going to cut my pieces apart, and we're going to check all of the intersections to see how they look, to make sure our seam's nested. So that looks perfect. And I like to do this before I go to the ironing table so that if I need to fix it, I can fix it before I go to the ironing station. So they all look good. So let's go press. So now we have 5 4 patches, I'm going to set the seam all at one time, nice and flat, and then we're going to press to one side. It actually doesn't matter which direction you press, because if you're pressing from this direction, it's exactly the same as if you press from this direction. So it really, this block doesn't matter. And you want to just put your iron right on the edge of the intersection. And I'm finger pressing this down before I iron. And now you have 5 4 patches that you made with strip sets, and that was really quick and easy. So let's move to our half square triangles. We're going to take our fabric A squares and we're going to draw some lines on the wrong side of the fabric. So the first thing I like to do is draw a line with a friction pin in the very center from corner to corner, and it's very important that it goes from point to point. I'm going to do that on both. The friction pin will disappear with heat later. Then what I'm going to do is draw a 1/4 inch line on each side of that center line. So you've got right on that center line. I'm going to turn it around so you have 3 lines. This is just the way that I like to do them. Now as you advance, there are other ways to make half square triangles, but for a beginner I think this is the easiest way to start learning. So again, 1/4 inch away from the center. So now you have 3 lines on both of your fabric A squares. We're going to take our fabric B squares and we're going to put those right side together. Now since we're working with solids, there's not a right or wrong side, but if you're working with prints, it has to be right sides together. And we're going to make sure all 4 of the corners meet up exactly, and we're going to put a pin away from the 2 lines. We're going to do that on both. We're going to go to our sewing machine, switch to an open toe foot, and we're going to stitch on the 2 outside lines. Just ignore the inside line for now. So again, we're going to stitch on the outside lines, and we're going to stitch directly on the line, not to the left and not to the right. So just stay right on that line. And the center of this foot is right on that line. That's how I can see where I'm going. We're going to flip that around and just stitch on the other side. We're going to work on our second one. Turn that around, stitch on the other line. And now we can go trim these. So what this is going to give you is 2 half square triangles. So if you look, you're going to get one on this side and you're gonna get another on this side, which is amazing. So we've drawn that line in the very center. We're gonna cut directly on that line. You don't have to be 100% accurate on this cut since it is the seam allowance, but I do like to be accurate because it just gives me a nicer result. So we're gonna cut directly on that center line, and you're gonna see that you have 4 half square triangles with no wasted fabrics. And now we're gonna go press these, and our block is almost done. So now we're gonna set our seam, and then we're gonna press toward the green. And we made our half square triangles slightly larger so that we can trim them down. Just because you're a beginner, I think that will help you get a more accurate result by trimming down, adding that extra step for a really nice result. So at this point, you don't need to trim your dog ears off because we're going to do that on the next step. So now let's trim these down. So we want these to measure 4.5 inches. So we're going to trim them down. The first thing you'll do is find on your ruler, on one of the edges of a Creative Grids ruler, there should be a diagonal 45-degree line. So I'm going to find that line, put that on my seam, and go all the way to the edge. And you want to get a clean cut on each side. And you're just taking a little sliver off. And then you're going to rotate, line up first of all the diagonal line and then the 4.5 inch. So I've got the diagonal line, 4.5 and 4.5, and I'm going to trim. And that gives me an exact 4.5 inch half square triangle. We're going to do that on all 4. And you want to make sure when you trim this edge that you've got 4.5 on each side, so you don't trim it too short. Rotate, use that same diagonal line and the 2 4.5 inch. So 4.5, 4.5, trim. And when you trim, you're going to see that each of the points have a nice point. So your point is right on the edge. And you can just take your time doing this. You can see I'm going pretty slow, but I want to have an accurate result. So and again, if you're cutting, you should have 4.5 all the way here and here before you trim this first side. Turn it around and trim 4.5, and you should have 4.5 inch unfinished half square triangles. And now we can build our block. So now we're going to assemble our block, and I'm just going to follow my pattern, and I'm going to have the red 9 patch go all the way down. So that's the first step, all the way down. And then these two, this one goes in opposite direction and this one goes in opposite direction. So I'm just following my pattern, paying attention to the red. And then I'm going to lay down my half square triangles following my pattern. So this one, the pink is here, the pink is here, the pink is here. I'm just going to follow my pattern. And what I love about using a design board is once you have it set, it will stay in the same spot. So I'm just gonna double check. Pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, pink, green, red, and red. So I just make sure I have it just the way that the pattern calls for it. And then we're gonna be sewing down this seam, pressing, and this seam. So to start, we're gonna just fold the first line over, right side together. And then I'm going to pin at the beginning and end of each. And so as you're pinning, you want each of the edges to line up. You can put a pin in the center if you want, you don't have to. And then we're going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to put the 1/4 inch foot back on our machine and go all the way down and chain piece all the way down. So I'm just going to pull from my design board in the same exact order as I've laid it out. We can just cut this off and go to our ironing board. So now you're going to keep all your pieces chained together, set your seams, and we're going to press toward our 4 patch. So I'm going to press this, finger press it first, finger press these toward the 4 patch. Same thing here. And then when I turn that over, you're going to see how the seams will nest because we're going towards the 4 patch, 4 patch, 4 patch. So we're going to bring our design board back and we're going to place this down. Now if you place it this way, you're going to see that this is not the right way because your 9 patches are touching. So you're going to flip it, but you've kept everything chained together, so everything should be in the same spot. So now it's nice and in place, everything's going the right way. We're going to clip these little pieces apart. And then we're going to add the last row. So you just put this right side together, right sides together, and right sides together. And that's why working with a design board is really nice. And if you don't have, you can purchase them at the Fat Quarter Shop, or we have a video on how you make them, or you can just put a little board with batting on it. I'm going to pin this the same way we did previously, and then we're going to go and sew down this edge, and then we are like really almost done now. Now we're going to just stitch down this edge just like we did on the other side. And just keep stitching. we can go press. So we've got it all chained together. We're going to do the same thing. Press, set that seam, press toward the 4-patch. And we're almost done with our entire set of blocks. So now we're going to put this on our design board. Cut these apart. And I'm going to, first we're going to sew the top and the middle together. So we'll put those right sides together, lock our seams, make sure the seams nest. You can feel that intersection right there. Pin in both of the intersections. You'll just feel that lock right in because the seams are going the opposite way. And we're going to just go sew this seam and then come right back and add the bottom row. And when you're sewing to here, you can see your point where your half square triangle at the top, and you're going to want to sew right on that point. So you can kind of look at that as you're stitching. And you're not going to see it on this side, so you're just going to hope for the best and hope it comes out. So I'm going to look at my block, and this one is perfect. And this one looks like it's not meeting up exactly, so I can sew this a little bit tighter. So I'm going to just put that on there and then just sew a little bit wider. And that's perfect, so let's go press. So you're going to set your seam. You've got lots of seams right now. So when you set your seams and you've got lots of seams, it's going to help more. We're going to press toward the top and bottom. And again, I'm going to finger press. Now, if you just pressed your iron right on that, you would have duck pleats. So I know I say it in every video, but it's so important to me. So then you're just going to put the edge of your iron right on that seam allowance and press. It's nice and flat. It's coming out perfect. So then we're going to lay this block down. You're going to make sure you don't rotate it this way because that would look really funny. So you're just going to put that down, right sides together, and again we're going to press, and we're going to first do the intersections. And then each of the ends, and you can pin as little or as much as you want. Some people think that pinning takes a lot of time, but I feel like pinning saves me time because I don't have to unrip my seams as often as I do if I don't pin. So now we're going to do the final seam. So looking at that seam, I'm just going to stitch it a little bit closer to the point so it makes it match up perfectly. So now on this one, I'm just going to start stitching. We're just got that final seam, just a 1/4 inch seam. So when I'm looking at this point, I can make the seam a little bit wider, and that'll make it match up. Now that's total personal preference if you want to do that. So to do that, you would just start over your previous stitches and just stitch a little bit thicker, and let's see how that looks. So you can see that my stitch, I just went a little bit to the left, and it looks a lot better. And I could do the same thing on this one. Make it a little bit tighter. So that looks much better. So now we can press. So we're going to set that final seam nice and flat. Press towards the bottom. Get it nice and flat. And I can tell that that just did not lay exactly flat, so I'm going to do it a little bit flatter. And when you touch your block, it should feel nice and flat. So now we're going to just trim the slivers off our last block. So our friendship star variation is looking so beautiful. We're just going to trim the slivers off the edge. That's what I call it. You don't even have to do this step. It's just a way for me to square it up. And I'm just taking a tiny bit off, and it just keeps it nice and straight, and it also takes all the threads off. Now here, you don't want to trim this much off, because if you trimmed off a lot, you would be trimming into your seam allowance, which you don't want to do. So I'm just getting these little threads off, and that will help in your final assembly because you will have less lint all over the place. So that is our block 9. It's looking wonderful. I'm so excited all of you guys have joined me for this. It's been a joy having you. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I'll see you next week when we put all of our blocks together into a quilt.